On this video, I want to continue what we had started in Revelation 18, and it's the downfall of Rome. And John is predicting this before it happened. And we start at 18:1, where he describes it as fallen is great Babylon. And we're dealing with Mystery Babylon, which is really a way of referring to Rome and the downfall of the Roman Empire. It is interesting as I look at Breaking the Code by Bruce Metzger, and his commentary has been a great help to me. More than once, John had found comfort for himself and his people by proclaiming the fall of Rome. So certain is he that God will judge the persecutors of the church that he now devotes 2 chapters, 17 and 18, 2 chapters to an account of the crashing down of the fabulous grandeur that was Rome. To say directly that God would destroy imperial Rome would, of course, been altogether treasonous in the eyes of the imperial authorities. So, like a prisoner writing in code from a concentration camp, John on the Isle of Patmos, John characterizes the power of evil as Babylon, just as Babylon represented to the Hebrews all that was wicked and symbolized persecution. So for John, Rome was another Babylon, the source and fountainhead of all seductive luxury and vice, living in a voluptuous materialism and selfishness. And as we look at what actually happened, we have learned how Christians were severely persecuted. They were either clothed in the skins of animals and exposed in the arena to the attacks of half famished dogs, or dipped in tar and put on crosses to be set on fire, and when the daylight failed, to be burned as lights by night. This goes back to the annals. This is on page 86, page 44 of Tacitus. So Tacitus comments that Nero's persecution of Christians was so terrible that even non-Christian citizens were horrified and began to intercede on their behalf. So as we move into chapter 18, we saw, like the tolling of a funeral bell, the repeated lamentation, alas, alas, the great city. And the kings of the earth had consorted with Rome, and they weep and wail over her fall. And John sees this in a prophetic way. And so in chapter 18, he's going to spell it out, and we've already looked at the first part of chapter 18. And I want to continue from this point on, talking about the grammar, and especially picking it up in verse 5 and following. Notice we saw verse 4 last time, that John writes, I heard another voice out of heaven saying, come out of her, my people, in order that you might not fellowship or have participation in her sins, and from her plagues, in order that you might not receive. In other words, separate from her. Don't be a part of what she represents, is John's point. We stopped there last time. So now I'm continuing on at verse 5 as he continues to describe the situation and what actually is going on in Rome and describing her downfall. So as we pick it up, notice it reads, Hate ekalethusan altes, chai harmartiai akli tu uranu, because her sins literally were joined unto heaven, sort of like they were piled up and joined together. Ekalethesan is from kalao. It is the aorist indicative active third person plural. Aorist indicative passive third person plural from kalao. So it's like the sins are piled up unto heaven. Kai emne sin hatha as ta adekemata altes. And God has remembered her unrighteous deeds. Emne sin is your aorist indicative active third person singular from ne manuo. So God has remembered her unrighteous acts. So now he says, render to her according to what she did. And so notice verse 6, apadate alte, hos kai alte epedoken. That is, give to her as she gave, or as she rendered to others understood. Apadate is your aorist active imperative, plural, second person plural from apadidomi. So give to her as also she, apadidomi, as she gave. Here we have your aorist indicative active third person singular from apadidomi. So you give to her as she gave. Kai diplosate ta dipla kata ta erga altes. And make double. Diplosate is from diplao. It is the aorist imperative active second person plural from diplao. So make double the double, we could say, according to her work. Kata ta erga altes. In other words, give her back what she has given, is what John is saying. Into paterio ho ekerasin kerasete alte diplun. That is, with the cup by which she ekerasin, with the cup by which she mingled to her double. It is interesting here that he is telling or speaking the judgment which is to come. And as we look at this verse, it means to mix or to mingle. And the root is keranumi. So with the cup by which she mingled, ekerasin is your aorist indicative active. Aorist indicative active, third person singular from keranumi, and kerasate is your aorist active imperative from keranumi. So mix for her in the cup, which she mix for her double, diplun. And then, and this is from the root keranumi, Chasa edoxaxen altain, as much as she glorified herself. In other words, with how much or the same degree that she glorified herself. And notice edoxaxen is the aorist indicative active, third person singular from doxazo. So as much as she glorified herself, estreniasen, she not only glorified herself, but lived a proud and luxurious life. Here we have the root streniao. It is the aorist indicative active third person singular, which means to live like a luxurious life in arrogancy and pride. And then he continues, so much, in other words, render back to her, date aute basanisman kai penthas, that is, give to her then torment and mourning. Date is from didomi, it's the aorist imperative, second plural, masculine plural, or excuse me, second singular from didomi. So give in this imperative, then give to her basanisman, torment, kai penthas, and mourning. In other words, give to her what she has given to others, seems to be John's point. Hate ente cardia autes lege hate, because in her heart she says, Kathemai basilisa, I sit a queen. Kathemai is your present middle indicative from kathemai. So I set a basilisa, I set as a queen, kai kera uk emi, and a widow I shall never, ever, I shall not be. In other words, excuse me, and a widow I am not, uk emi. Emi is your present indicative active, first person singular from emi. So a widow I am not, kai penthas me ido. And furthermore, she continues, and sorrow I will never ever see. In other words, I'll never see sorrow. She has a double negative here, John says, puts down, describing this arrogance of Rome. And ido is an aorist active subjunctive describing her attitude. I'll never ever see sorrow. And so we move then to verse 8. Diatuta in mia chimera, hexusin chai plagai altes. On account of this, in one day, her plagues will come. Heko is the root, and hexusin is your future indicative active third person plural. So in one day, her plagues will come, namely thanatos kai penthos, that is death and sorrow and famine. In other words, he's depicting her day of judgment, that is Rome. Kai en puri kata kauthesatai, and with fire she shall be burned. In other words, looking at her final judgment. This is the future indicative passive third person singular from kata kaio. That is, she shall be completely burned with fire. And because hate iskuras kurias kata as ha krenas altain. Because the Lord is strong, who has judged her. Krenos is the aorist active participle, nominative masculine singular from krino. So judgment is pronounced upon Rome. And Rome, I think, becomes a type of the world system as a whole and all of the evil that goes on and someday will face a final judgment. So it not only refers to historic Rome, but I think a futuristic final world system that will be judged. I again appreciate Metzger's thought here on page 87, where he says, "It is remarkable that when John wrote these immensely moving chapters about the fall of Rome, Rome was still very much alive, still enjoying undisputed sovereignty and undimmed prestige. So great, however, is John's faith in the sovereignty of God, and so great is his confidence that the justice of God must eventually punish evil, that he writes as though Rome had already fallen. As with so many judgments of God, the fulfillment is actually came slowly, but at last suddenly. For centuries, Rome decayed and degenerated, moral poison infecting her whole life. Then, during a fateful week in August of the year AD 410, Alaric, with his northern hordes of Goths, pillaged Rome and laid it waste. So John is predicting something that actually happened at a later time, but predicting it as though it was already in God's judgment. And I also, it was interesting when Metzger concludes this chapter, and I need to go back and do more grammar, but I thought it was interesting. On page 87 and 88, he writes these words, and this is in Breaking the Code by Bruce Metzger. What do we learn from this part of the book of Revelation? Certainly, John wrote in order to stimulate faithfulness on the part of persecuted Christians living in the first century. He assures them of the ultimate victory of Christ. But Revelation also has a warning for believers down through the years. Babylon is allegorical of the idolatry that any nation commits when it elevates material abundance, military prowess, technological sophistication, imperial grandeur, racial pride, and any other glorification of the creature over the Creator. In these chapters, we have an up-to-date portrait of what may occur when we idolize the gross national product, worship growth, and become so preoccupied with quantity that we ignore quality. The message of the book of Revelation concerns the character and timeliness of God's judgment, not only of persons, but also of nations, and in fact, of all principalities and powers, which is to say, all authorities, corporations, institutions, structures, bureaucracies, and the like. And to the extent that ecclesiastical denominations and sects have succumbed to the lure of power and prestige, the words of John are applicable also to present day church structures. And I thought those were interesting words in the summary of what the book, especially chapter 18, can teach by way of application. So while it's looking at Rome, Rome becomes a symbol, it seems, of the whole world system and of systems and God's final judgment when Christ returns as King of Kings and Lord of Lords to judge what Rome itself and what Rome symbolized as the world system alien to Christ and to his kingdom.